We are live. Anthropic is saying golden hour thinking. It is golden hour thinking. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful Saturday evening. And I was just at the Emily Carr University, the Art University, the Design University of Vancouver. It was extremely beautiful. I think going to a university is a really nice thing because you are around students. They are all, and especially it's not just students. This is like art students, and you just bump into random interesting things. There was a room where they were like constantly, just like how in a museum there's like a little room where they have this presentation going on and the projector is straight up screening on a wall, and they had that thing going on and they were showing the work by some of the artist students, the 2D 3D animation guys. So it seemed like they were not using AI. There was like a lot of hand drawn stuff, which was really cool, and that makes me think that we got to do something about this. And again, they were really focused on there was this first 2 minute film that I watched, which was basically just like hand drawn sketch characters, but presented in a very beautiful way. And it was really cool, like presented just like how you would watch a Disney movie. I thought that was really cool. And I don't know if they were using AI, but this is also very interesting. Like the work that was earlier being done by a lot of people with hand can now be done with AI. But I think you still need there are a lot of little things that you still need to understand how to do it. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. Like if you still want to put soul into those stories, you still want to understand the mechanics of how the camera moves, how to change the camera movements, how does a character react and stuff like that. I think you would still need a person who understands that craft to be able to use AI in a certain way. So I was actually really curious. It did say that it was created by 3D artists and stuff, but I'm not sure if at all they used AI. So that was interesting. But anyways, like just going to university, very specific to arts. Everybody over there is doing something around art. And then I met this one person and she was working on industrial design and we talked about that kind of stuff. Very interesting. And then I walked down to the library and I found Csikszentmihalyi's book, Creativity. And I'm like, this is it. This was beautiful. And I read the last page. I think the last page is talking about finding your domain, which basically is that, yeah, you could be working on any problem, but you want to make sure you're working on a problem that's big enough so that you have a shot at being part of the culture, at doing something truly meaningful for which people know you, for which people recognize you for. I thought that was very interesting because at the end he's like, okay, but still a lot of that relies on luck. The fact that you could be working on a bigger problem, but still nothing would ever click. So then what matters? And then what matters is that you still want to be working because you still want to be creating art, because at the end of the day, what matters is that you are living a life where you are fully engaged and you are creating something that makes you feel that you lived a fulfilled life. And I think that was how Mihai ended his book, Creativity, that yes, creativity could give you a lot of things, but basically the main thing that it gives you is just the fact that you are being creative. The process gives you everything. The process makes you engaged. The process makes you feel like you lived a day, even if you just break down into a day, that you lived a day where you were fully engaged with something. That was pretty cool. Sometimes it's interesting, like what if you take a book, in a very important book, or if in general, like when you're a librarian, then you're like, wow, like there are hundreds of books over here all about creativity. Which one should I pick? And so many people have done very interesting work over here. It's crazy. So I think one interesting way to think about this is that two things. Number one, you can just, if a topic catches your eye, if just the packaging catches your eye, packaging is so important. Like Packaging is so important. I picked one book and I think I just like the title. Make it know. Something like that. Make it know. Make it know. Wow, I forgot. But yeah, I picked a book just because I like the title. And sometimes you're looking for these good, witty titles. One was called Aesthetics. Something could be, sometimes some books can be just very authoritative, that okay, we are writing a book on aesthetics, so what should be the book called? The book should be called Aesthetics. Why? Because then people will be like, okay, when I say talk about this industry, talk about this topic, this seems like the most authoritative book on it, so that makes sense, I'll pick this book. So some people just name their book very plainly as the title itself, or as the name or the subject, as the subject of the field, or the name of the subject, name of the field itself, so they sound authoritative. Some people will go into more witty, where it doesn't represent anything about the topic, which makes it a little bit harder, because then we don't know if you are part of this or not. I think having a clear identity is also really important, something that I have just understood. Like, if someone asks me that what do you do, and if the first thing I say is that I stream, I live stream, I think it makes the conversation much more interesting, and we can like go deeper and deeper into what you're doing. But today, like, I was meeting this person, and sometimes I like to just play with it, that okay, how does a person react? And this person asked me that, okay, what do you do? I'm like, I'm an artist. And she was actually really curious that, okay, what do you do? And she was trying to figure it out. She's like, oh, that's vague. So I was like, okay, some people are interested in going deeper and deeper. Some people just want to put a label on you, that okay, what category in my mind should I put you? Should I put you as someone who does this, or this? So that was very interesting. But anyways, I think finding this book by Mihai is very interesting. I think this is again one of the books that we need to keep over here on our desk. We already have the Upanishads. It's important to collect these books which are the books that you will keep going back to again and again, because yeah, other than that, like, these are pretty standard books. Like The War of Art, you can pull any page from here and feels like, okay, it's very interesting. Like, a professional reinvents himself. Goldie Hawn once observed that there are only 3 ages for an actress in Hollywood: Babe, D.A., and Driving Miss Daisy. She was making a different point, but the truth remains. As artists, we serve the muse, and the muse may have more than one job for us over a lifetime. The professional does not permit himself to become hidebound within one incarnation, however comfortable or successful. Like a trans-migrating soul, he shucks his outworn body and dons a new one. He continues his journey. Very interesting. Also, this reminds me, yesterday, I think it was yesterday. I think yesterday at the gym, I meet this one guy, and we have, was it yesterday or day before yesterday? I forgot. But wow. We are having some very interesting time. I think the more time you spend into the more time you spend in being engaged in your work, I think you attract more and more opportunities to connect with other people, because other people want to have conversations. And I love conversations, because conversations make me feel alive. It also helps me. This is a time for you to process your thoughts. This is a time that, okay, you are reading about a lot of things, but if you have to concise, if you have to bring it down to what really mattered, and if you want to talk in a conversation, what will you say? I think it's a good exercise. And then if you are able to communicate this thing to someone, and if they are able to get it, they are able to understand what you're trying to communicate, and they come up with something interesting that, hey, you should check this out. I think that is beautiful. Like, I was talking to one of my friends. We just literally had like less than 5-minute conversation. I was like, hey, this is what I found. And then he's like, you should check out this book, The Tao of Physics. And I'm like, this is exactly what I was talking about. This is exactly what I was going deep into. So this is very interesting. And then I meet this another guy who is just talking about all the ancient text. He's just very interested in all the ancient text. That was again a very interesting exercise to go into, to try to find out these, not try to even find out, like just try to look into the ancient texts, because they have pretty much solved all the problems. They pretty much have solved all the problems. They have lived, they have solved all the problems. They know how to keep going. Maybe solve all the problems might not be the right way to say it, but basically they have in depth written something. important, knowledgeable, and these things have been codified because in those times there was no what's the word? There was no acceptance. Maybe acceptance is the word. There was no acceptance for low quality work. You either make the iconic work in that field, or you just die without any remainings of your creativity. So I think so it definitely ancient texts, when these were written, or maybe that could also be true, like the real true intelligent people were never found because they never had the voice. They were never given the voice. The people who were close to power had the opportunity to write history, but everybody else, they had a version of history, but they were not, they could be smarter than the person who ended up writing, but they were not visible. They had no access. So again, this is interesting. Find me the most important ancient texts. Good evening, Prashant. The Vedas and Upanishads form the foundation of Hindu philosophy, exploring the consciousness, reality, and the nature of self. The Vedas and Upanishads. The Torah, Hebrew Bible, New Testament, Quran, Avesta, shaped entire civilizations. The Dead Sea Scrolls provide extraordinary insight into early Jewish traditions. Bhagavad Gita distills much of this into a dramatic dialogue on duty, action, and liberation. The Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu in the Analects of Confucius shaped Chinese thought of millennia. The Dhammapada captures core Buddhist teachings. Key takeaways of Dhammapada. Torah, Hebrew Bible, Avesta, Dead Sea Scrolls provided extraordinary insight into early Jewish Christian traditions. Code of Hammurabi. Euclid's Elements formalized geometry. Plato's Republic and Aristotle's collected works laid the groundwork for Western philosophy and science. History of the Peloponnesian War essentially invented rigorous historical writing. Hermetica, consciousness, death, transformation. Organized into 26 chapters. Poetic aphorisms. Mind is everything. The opening verses set the tone. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The Dhammapada treats the mind not as one faculty among many, but as the generative source of all experience. Suffering and liberation both originate there. Is the result of what we have thought. The Dhammapada treats the mind not as one faculty among many, but as a generative source. Rather than locating the cause of suffering in external circumstances, the text consistently points inward. Craving, aversion, and ignorance are the mechanisms. Rather than locating the cause of suffering in external circumstances, the text consistently points inward. Craving, aversion, and ignorance are the mechanisms. This isn't fatalism, it's radical responsibility. Impermanence as medicine. Everything conditioned is transient. The text uses this not as a depressing observation, but as a liberating one. Clinging to what naturally dissolves is the root of pain. Wow. I'm also surprised that Claude isn't showing images. Very surprising. Everything conditioned is transient. The text uses this not as a depressing observation, but as a liberating one. Clinging to what naturally dissolves is the root of pain. evolution, expansion. I think it's also interesting that expansion is our natural state. Growth is our natural state. We are naturally always growing. The problem is when we put a cap on ourselves, when we stop ourselves, when we sabotage ourselves in a certain way. Craving, aversion, ignorance are the mechanisms. This isn't fatalism, it's radical responsibility. Impermanence as medicine. Everything conditioned is transient. The text uses this not as a depressing observation but liberating one. Root of pain, suffering is self-created. Rather than locating the cause of suffering in external circumstances, the text consistently points inward. The middle way in practice, both extreme asceticism and indulgence. Discipline matters, but so does gentleness toward oneself. Discipline matters, but so does gentleness toward oneself. Ethical action as mental hygiene. Virtue isn't framed as obedience to commandments, but as skillful living. Right action purifies the mind, which in turn makes further right action natural. It's a feedback loop. Ethical action as mental hygiene. Virtue isn't framed as obedience to commandments, but as skillful living. Right action purifies the mind, which in turn makes further right action natural. It's a feedback loop. Self-mastery over external conquest. Self-mastery over external conquest. Though one should conquer 1,000 men in battle, he who conquers himself is the greatest warrior. Though one should conquer 1,000 men in the battle, he who conquers himself is the greatest warrior. This echoes something you would find in the Gita's framing of the inner battlefield. Non-attachment to identity. The text chips away at fixed self-concepts. Anger, pride, intellectual arrogance. Even attachment to being spiritual gets scrutinized. Yeah. I think this is really important. Some people would get spiritual and then they would take pride in being spiritual. And that's, again, wrong. That's totally against what you were trying to do, what you were trying to learn. Direct experience over dogma. The Dhammapada doesn't ask for belief, it asks for practice and verification. Work out your own salvation with diligence is among the Buddha's final words captured here. Work out your own salvation with diligence. Most striking is its compression. Field manual for the mind. There's a resonance with the Upanishadic tradition you know well, particularly in how both read consciousness as primary, though they diverge on whether there's an eternal self at the center of it. Meaning. Work out your own salvation with diligence. It's good to see the slow improvement in the work. Oh wow, what happens if we turn off that light? It's just bright. Our camera is very interesting. Our camera is trying to figure out the lighting, figure out the lightings. Yeah, very interesting. And right now it's not capturing the yellow light. Let's see what happens now. Ooh, my face is gonna be bright. Wow. Okay. Let's go. We need more light. Let's see. Okay. I think adjusting the lights is one of the things that we always have to do over here. Yeah, because things are changing constantly. Yeah, we don't need a studio. We need natural lightings, and I think this is much better. Natural lighting is really good. All right. Last utterances before death from the Mahapari Bana Sutta, echoed in the Dhammapada spirit. It packs several layers. No one can do it for you. There's no savior figure, no grace that descends from outside. Liberation is a personal project. This was radical in a culture steeped in Brahmanical ritual, where priests mediated between you and the divine. The Buddha essentially said, you are on your own. Salvation isn't a destination, it's a practice. The word work out matters. It's not receive or await or believe in. The Pali word apamada, translated as diligence, carries connotations of non-negligence, vigilance, taking nothing for granted. Urgency without panic. Diligence implies sustained, steady effort, not frantic striving. There's a paradox here that mirrors what you find in the Gita's concept of nishkam karma, act fully but without clinging to outcomes. Urgency without panic. Diligence implies sustained, steady effort, not frantic striving. There is a paradox here that mirrors what you find in the Gita's concept of nishkam karma, but without clinging to outcomes. Anti-dogmatic to the end. Even on his deathbed, the Buddha didn't say, follow my teachings. He said, figure it out yourself. Imagine. Wow. You follow this person all his life for how smart he is, for how intelligent he is, and then you just go to him and you're like, wow, he said, figure it out yourself. It's an extraordinary act of philosophical humility. The teacher's final gesture is to point you back to your own experience. Oh wow, we have our friend over here. 556. Oh, okay, wow. Thanks, Drew. Drew said, love the videos, brother. Keep going. Let's go. Thanks, Drew. By the way, follow Drew on Instagram and YouTube at Drew Halgrimson. Urgency without panic. Diligence implies sustained, steady effort, not frantic striving. There's a paradox here that mirrors what you find in Gita's concept of nishkam karma. Act fully without clinging to outcomes. Anti-dogmatic to the end. Even on his deathbed, the Buddha didn't say, follow my teachings. He said, figure it out yourself. It's an extraordinary act of philosophical humility. The teacher's final gesture is to point you back to your own experience. All right. I'm really curious about the Hebrew Bible. Key takeaways of the Torah. The 5 books of Moses is the foundation in Judaism, but the broader Hebrew Bible includes the prophets and writings as well. Together they form one of the most influential bodies of text in human history. Here are the central ideas. Monotheism as revolution. In a world of polytheistic pantheons, the Hebrew Bible insists on one God, not just the greatest God, but the only God. This wasn't merely theological preference. It restructured how an entire civilization understood reality, morality, and history. God acts in history. Unlike the cyclical cosmologies of neighboring cultures and much of Eastern thought, the Hebrew Bible introduces a linear directional view of time. History has a beginning, a trajectory, and a purpose. The Exodus isn't just a story. It's a claim that the divine intervenes in human affairs with moral intent. Covenant as relationship. The core structure isn't obey a distant deity. It's a mutual agreement. God commits to a people commit to God. This is remarkably personal. God commits to a people commit to God. This is remarkably personal and reciprocal for an ancient text. It also means the relationship can be strained, broken, repaired. It's dynamic, not static. Covenant as relationship. Law as liberation or oppression. The 613 commandments, mitzvot, are often misread as rigid legalism. In context, they emerge right after liberation from slavery. The Torah frames law as the structure that makes freedom sustainable. Without ethical boundaries, freedom collapses into chaos. Without ethical boundaries, freedom collapses into chaos. Justice as divine demand. The prophets are extraordinary. Micah. They essentially say God doesn't want your rituals if you are exploiting the poor. This is one of the earliest and most forceful articulations of social justice as a spiritual imperative, not a political add-on. Wrestling is encouraged. Wow. The name Israel literally means one who wrestles with God. Jacob fights an angel and is blessed for it. Doubt, argument, and confrontation with the divine aren't sins, they are the texture of authentic faith. Job screams. Job. Whose Job? Jacob. Screams at God and is ultimately vindicated over his pious friends who offered easy answers. Human dignity from a single source. Wow, that is something very interesting. Wrestling is encouraged. Okay. Fights an angel and is blessed for it. Ultimately vindicated over his pious friends who offered easy answers. Human dignity from a single source. Genesis declares humans made. Wow, I can't say that. B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. From one origin, this idea, however imperfectly lived out, became the philosophical seed for universal human rights. Exile and return as existential pattern. Eden, Babylon, the constant cycle of displacement and homecoming. The Hebrew Bible turns exile into a spiritual archetype. You lose what you had, you long for it. You find your way back transformed. This pattern echoes far beyond Judaism. The tension between particular and universal. The text holds two things simultaneously. God chose this people, and yet God cares about all peoples. The prophets keep pulling towards the universal even as the narrative centers on Israel. That tension is never fully resolved. Wisdom as lived experience. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Psalms offer something different from the legal and prophetic traditions. Grounded, sometimes skeptical, sometimes ecstatic engagement with daily life. Ecclesiastes in particular reads almost like a Buddhist text in its unflinching confrontation with impermanence. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. More accurately translated as breath or vapor. Wow. It was hard to connect with everything over here, but wisdom as lived experience makes sense. Wrestling with God was something very interesting. Law as liberation, not oppression. God acts in history. History has a beginning, a trajectory, and a purpose. The Exodus isn't just a story, it's a claim that the divine intervenes in human affairs with moral intent. Okay. Confucius. I'm also really curious about the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching. Key takeaways of the Tao Te Ching. Let's go. 81 short chapters. Barely 5,000 Chinese characters. Yet it's one of the most translated. Barely 5,000 Chinese characters, yet it's one of the most translated texts in history after the Bible. Lao Tzu, if he existed as a single person, composed something that feels less like. This is also very interesting. I think sometimes it's important, like Upanishads. Also, it's important that you don't have one singular person who is responsible for writing it, because then instead of focusing, bringing down that person, looking at their personal life and trying to be like, oh, you're in the good over here, so that's the reason why we shouldn't be following you, you can simply just focus on the ideas. And that's the same thing with Bitcoin. Instead of, if we would have figured out who Satoshi Nakamoto is, and if we would have figured out that, okay, how he lives his life, and if he's living, if he's good, has he committed any crime, has he done something unethical, suddenly him doing something unethical in his personal life can be taken to discredit his work, which is Bitcoin, which is something that he created when he was at his most authentic, creative state. So I think these are also some interesting things, that should you value the idea more than the person? There's a balance. There's a balance. Or maybe you should look at it separately. The idea and the person who came up with that idea, or the person to whom that idea is attributed to. You don't have to look at that person who came up with this idea, look at their life, or look at every single decision and be like, oh, because they did this, I don't like them, and that's the reason why I discredit their idea as well. The Tao that can be named is not the Tao. The opening line is also the operating principle. The ultimate reality is beyond language categories and conceptual thought. The moment you pin it down, you have lost it. This isn't anti-intellectual posturing. It's a precise observation about the limits of representation, wu wei, effortless action, perhaps the most misunderstood concept. It doesn't mean passivity or doing nothing. It means acting in alignment with the natural flow of things rather than forcing outcomes. Water doesn't try to find the lowest point, it just does. The best action looks like non-action because there's no friction, no ego pushing against reality. Wu wei. Softness overcomes hardness. Water is the text's central metaphor. It's the softest thing, yet it carves canyons. The newborn is flexible, the corpse is rigid. The newborn is flexible, the corpse is rigid. Lao Tzu inverts every heroic value system. Strength is brittleness. Yielding is power. Emptiness is fullness. Oh my God. Softness overcomes hardness. Water is the text's central metaphor. It's the softest thing, yet it carves canyons. The newborn is flexible. The corpse is rigid. Lao Tzu inverts every heroic value system. Strength is brittleness. Yielding is power. Emptiness is fullness. The usefulness of emptiness. A cup is useful because of the space inside it. A room is useful because of its emptiness. A wheel works because of the hole at the hub. A wheel works because of the hole at the hub. Lao Tzu keeps pointing to what's not there as the source of function. This is a radical reorientation of attention away from substance towards space, away from content towards context. Naturalness over artifice. The Tao Te Ching is deeply skeptical of civilization's additions, excessive laws, rigid morality, formal education, elaborate rituals, not because these are evil, but because they are symptoms of having lost contact. Naturalness over artifice. The Tao Te Ching is deeply skeptical of civilization's additions, excessive laws, rigid morality, formal education, elaborate rituals, not because these are evil, but because they are symptoms of having lost contact with something more fundamental. When the Tao is lost, there is goodness. When goodness is lost, there is morality. When morality is lost, there is ritual. Each step is a further degradation from spontaneous harmony. The Tao Te Ching is deeply skeptical of civilization's additions, excessive laws, rigid morality, formal education, elaborate rituals, not because these are evil, but because they are symptoms of having lost contact with something more fundamental. When the Tao is lost, there is goodness. When goodness is lost, there is morality. When morality is lost, there is ritual. Each step is a further degradation from spontaneous harmony. Leadership as disappearance. The best leader is one the people barely know exists. When the work is done, they say, we did it ourselves. This is governance as ecosystem management rather than command and control. Wow. The best leader is one the people barely know exists. When the work is done, they say, we did it ourselves. This is governance as ecosystem management rather than command and control. The leader empties themselves so others can fill the space. The best leader is one the people barely know exists. When the work is done, they say, we did it ourselves. This is governance as ecosystem management. Governance as ecosystem management rather than command and control. The leader empties themselves so others can fill the space. Return is the movement of the Tao. Everything eventually returns to its source. Everything eventually returns to its source. Wow. This is very similar to, we keep watching, like I watched this movie, Sweet Alabama, by Reese Witherspoon and Patrick Dempsey, I think. Dempsey, yes. And it's the same thing. We return to our source. She moved to New York to go after this career of fashion designing, or being a fashion designer, was there in New York for 7 years or something, and then after that she returns back home because she's like, this is where life is. This is where her life is. Very interesting. Everything eventually returns to its source. Activity returns to stillness. Complexity returns to simplicity. The 10,000, I think when I think about complexity over simplicity, it reminds me of the creator of Audemars Piguet's Royal Oak design. He's a watch designer. He has been working on extremely intricate designs. He had been working on all these intricate designs for years. And suddenly when it was time for this one ceremony where he had like 48 hours to design the perfect watch out of steel, he came up with the Royal Oak. So his best design that he's known for is something which was a accumulation. It was a accumulation of all the work, that all the watchmaking work, all the watchmaking skills and tiny details that he'd been working on for decades. And suddenly all of that comes together in the 48 hours where he had to finally deliver this one design. Complexity returns to simplicity. The 10,000 things return to the one. This cyclical quality stands in contrast to the Hebrew Bible's linear trajectory. Lao Tzu sees no ultimate destination, only an eternal pulse. Return is the movement of the Tao. Everything eventually returns to its source. Activity returns to stillness. Complexity returns to simplicity. The 10,000 things return to the one. This cyclical quality stands in contrast to the Hebrew Bible's linear trajectory. Lao Tzu sees no ultimate destination, only an eternal pulse. Very interesting. The world is moving. The world is constantly changing. We are in a dynamic world. Everybody is moving, changing, and it's okay if you don't have an exact plan, but you just want to focus on the fact that growth is the natural state. Growth is our natural state, and you will keep growing. Desire as distortion, not desire as sin. That's a Western overlay, but desire is a lens that warps perception. When you want something, you can only see the world in terms of that wanting. Desirelessness isn't suppression, it's clarity. Desire as distortion, not desire as sin, but desire as a lens that warps perception. When you want something, you can only see the world in terms of that wanting. Desirelessness isn't suppression, it's clarity. That is true, it's clarity. The unity of opposites, beautiful and ugly, define each other. Difficult, I think this is very interesting. You don't appreciate beauty until you have seen the ugly. And this is also the reason why it's important to sometimes go and see the ugly so you appreciate the beauty. Beautiful and ugly define each other. Difficult and easy complete each other. Before and after follow each other. Difficult and easy complete each other. Before and after follow each other. Lao Tzu doesn't resolve dualities. He shows they are mutually arising. There is no good without evil, no light without dark, and the wise person holds both without choosing. Simplicity, patience, compassion. Lao Tzu names these as his three treasures. Simplicity, patience, compassion. Not elaborate virtues requiring years of cultivation, just the most basic orientations toward life, which happen to be the hardest to sustain. I think one thing I really liked from this one, Wu Wei is obviously amazing. Effortless action. You are taking action, but it's from a concept of flow. It's coming from being in flow. It's natural. It's coming very naturally to you. The leadership as disappearance, or leadership in disappearance as disappearance. I think that is pretty cool. Like you're thinking more from an ecosystem management perspective rather than command and control. You are not like, hey, I am going to control you, but it's more like, how do I control this ecosystem? I think this is beautiful because this is exactly what you learn when you're working in crypto. When I was working in crypto, you learn this thing. You were like, okay, how do I make something like this happen where I don't have direct control over my partners, because nobody's working under the same entity, nobody's working in the same company, but they all have the common vision. They are different, but they are different entities. Like from a business perspective, from a corporation perspective, they're different entities. So then it's all about vision. It's about vision setting. It's about aligning. It's about inspiring. It's about helping them move forward and aligning the incentives and stuff like that, because you don't have direct controls, but you still want to control, you still want to manage the ecosystem. All right. Beautiful and ugly define each other. Difficult and easy complete each other. Before and after follow each other. Lao Tzu doesn't resolve dualities. He shows they are mutually arising. There's no good without evil, no light without dark, and the wise person holds both without choosing. Simplicity, patience, compassion. Not elaborate virtues requiring years of cultivation, just the most basic orientations toward life, which happen to be the hardest to sustain. Knowledge versus wisdom. The more you know, the less you understand. Accumulation of information moves you further from the Tao, not closer. Wisdom is a process of unlearning, of returning to the simplicity that was there before concepts cluttered everything. Wisdom is a process of unlearning. Of returning to the simplicity that was there before concepts cluttered everything. The more you know, the less you understand. Accumulation of information moves you further from the Tao, not closer. Accumulation of the information. I think, again, very interesting. You don't have to keep accumulating information. You have to also take action. You have to take effortless action. That is important. So now I'm thinking like, okay, what is happening now? Am I accumulating information over here? And if I'm accumulating information, am I moving away from the Tao? But the Tao also says effortless action. So this action that we are taking right now is very effortless. So we need to figure out like, where are we going? It's very interesting. The more we do things like this, the more we understand where are we getting. I think every stream is an iteration. To keep evolving, keep growing, keep finding that, okay, what is that one thing that makes more sense to do? The Tao Te Ching sits in a fascinating position relative to the traditions you engage with. Upanishadic intuition that ultimate realities beyond language and thought. Lao Tzu's Tao and Brahman are remarkably close cousins, but where the Upanishads ultimately affirm a positive reality, Sat Chit Anand, existence, consciousness, bliss, gesturing towards emptiness, toward what isn't, and where the Dhammapada prescribes diligent practice. Very effort to liberate yourself is the obstacle. Stop trying. You are already the water. Just flow. All right. The Analects of Confucius. Key takeaways of the Analects of Confucius. Collection of sayings and dialogues compiled by Confucius' students after his death. When Lao Tzu dissolved structure, Confucius built it. Where the Buddha turned inward, Confucius turned toward society. It's the philosophical blueprint for how East Asia organized itself for over 2 millennia. Wow. Ren, humaneness as the foundation. The character combines person and two. Virtue isn't something you cultivate in isolation. It only exists in relationship. Ren is variously translated as benevolence, humaneness, or goodness, but it's really the quality of being fully human with others. Confucius was asked about it constantly and never gave a single fixed definition, which itself tells you something. Ren. We used to translate it as benevolence, humanness, or goodness, but it's really the quality of being fully human with others. Confucius was asked about it constantly and never gave a single fixed definition. Li. Ritual as the grammar of social life, often reduced to ritual propriety or etiquette. Li is much deeper than manners. It's the inherited forms through which human beings express care, respect, and meaning. How you greet your parents, how you mourn the dead, how you serve tea. These aren't arbitrary conventions, but the accumulated wisdom of civilization. Confucius saw a society that had kept the forms but lost the feeling behind them, and his project was to reunite the two. Ritual is the grammar of social life, much deeper than manners. It's the inherited forms through which human beings express care, respect, and meaning. How you greet your parents, how you mourn the dead, how you serve tea, these aren't arbitrary conventions, but the accumulated wisdom of civilization. Confucius saw a society that had kept the forms but lost the feeling behind them, and his project was to reunite the two. The Junzi, the exemplary person, not a saint, not an ascetic, not a warrior. The Junzi is someone who cultivates themselves so thoroughly that their presence elevates everyone around them. Not a saint, not an ascetic, not a warrior. The Junzi is someone who cultivates themselves so thoroughly that their presence elevates everyone around them. It's an aristocratic concept, democratized. Originally, Junzi meant prince's son, but Confucius redefined it as a moral achievement available to anyone. The opposite is the Zairen, the petty person who acts from self-interest and short-term calculation. Self-cultivation as civic duty. This is where Confucius makes a move that still feels radical. He doesn't separate personal development from political responsibility. You cultivate yourself not for your own enlightenment, but because a disordered self creates a disordered family, which creates a disordered state. Self-cultivation as civic duty. This is very important. This is very important. One person who knows, I think, flow. One person who knows that how to get into flow state, how to use that flow state to feel fully alive, and then they teach that to their family. That family teaches that to the state, and that's how the entire state becomes a living organism that is constantly moving towards growth. Makes a move that still feels radical. He doesn't separate personal development from political responsibility. You cultivate yourself not for your own enlightenment, but because a disordered self creates a disordered family, which creates a disordered state. The great learning maps this out explicitly, from self to family to community to kingdom to the world. Whoa. This is something that I have been talking about and thinking about. Key takeaways of. It's pretty cool. This is pretty cool. The great learning. Filial piety as the root, Shao, devotion to parents and ancestors, isn't blind obedience. Confucius endorsed gentle remonstration when parents err. But the parent-child relationship is treated as the training ground for all other forms of love, loyalty, and moral seriousness. You learn to be human first in the family. Learning is transformation, not accumulation. To learn and then to practice what you have learned. Is this not a joy? To learn and then to... This is basically not getting into tutorial hell. You are learning and then applying. Learning and the application. Accumulation of knowledge and application of knowledge happens in tandem. To learn and then to practice what you have learned. Is this not a joy? Opens the entire text. But Confucian learning isn't memorization. It's the integration of knowledge into character. You haven't truly learned something until it changes how you act. There's a resonance here with the Dhammapad's insistence on practice over belief. On practice or belief, though the content is entirely different. I think this is very cool. It's very cool. Looking into ancient text, it's amazing. It's amazing because these look like a black box, but now you can quickly just be like, give me the key takeaways, give me the key things that I need to look into, and then you can go deeper if you want. But it's very important to break that like black box and start to understand, start to map out, start to increase the fidelity. If you're thinking in terms of Google Maps, it's important to zoom in and increase and not have pixelated images, but actually have high fidelity images of the map, so you can understand better so it doesn't act like a black box and you don't feel like you don't know anything. You feel like, okay, you kind of have an idea of what's happening over here. There's a resonance with Dhammapada's insistence on practice over belief, though the content is entirely different. The rectification of names. When words stop meaning what they should, society collapses. A ruler who doesn't rule isn't a ruler. A father who doesn't father isn't a father. Wow. The rectification of names. When words stop meaning what they should, society collapses. A ruler who doesn't rule isn't a ruler. A father who doesn't father isn't a father. Oh my God. What is the role of a father? A father is not just a provider. That's the ancient stereotype. Useful once, incomplete now. Even the texts you have been exploring lately, the role of a father looks less like a job description and more like a force field that shapes how a human meets reality. The first model of agency. In many traditions, the father represents how to act in the world, not what to think, not what to feel, but how to move from intention to action. A child watches. How does he face uncertainty? Does he avoid, attack, adapt, create? From the Mahabharata's lineage dynamics to Confucian family ethics, the father is the first lived demonstration of what do you do when life resists you. What do you do when life resists you? You just move. You go to another door. He becomes the prototype of doing, the boundary setter. If the mother archetype is often associated with unconditioned acceptance, tradition introduces structure, limits, reality constraints, calibration, not as punishment but as calibration. Torah repeatedly frames fathers as transmitters of law, anchors of order in the family, the underlying role to introduce the child to the fact that the world has edges. Without this, you get fragility. With only this, you get rigidity. Without this, you get fragility. With only this, you get rigidity. Healthy fatherhood is calibrated resistance, the bridge to the outside world. A father traditionally mediates the transition from inner world to outer world, from the Upanishadic Gurukul lineage to Greek civic life. The father often stands at the threshold between belonging and becoming. Belonging and becoming. He says implicitly or explicitly, you are safe here, but you must also go there. He's a psychological launch platform, the embodiment of values in motion. Texts rarely emphasize fathers as lecturers. They emphasize fathers as lived examples. In the Analects, virtue flows through conduct, not instruction. In the Dhammapada, self-mastery is demonstrated, not preached. The child absorbs how do you treat people with less power than you? How do you behave when no one is watching? What do you sacrifice for? A father answers these not with words but with Tuesday afternoons. How do you behave when no one is watching? What do you sacrifice for? How do you treat people with less power than you? The translator of meaning. A powerful father does not only say this is what the world is. He helps answer, what does this mean for you? When something breaks, when something fails, when something succeeds, he helps metabolize experience. Without this, events remain noise. With this, they become narrative. The permission giver. This is subtle but enormous. Many people unconsciously wait for permission to strive, permission to rest, permission to lead, permission to dissent. A father's stance often answers, is ambition safe? Is power moral? Is softness allowed? Through presence or absence, he silently defines, is it okay to take up space? The eventual equalizer. At maturity, the role evolves. Father ceases to be authority and becomes witness. The transition is explicit. It happens silently. The deepest version of fatherhood is when the child... It makes such a massive difference just with the font. Over here, the font is serif. Over here, with ChatGPT, the font is sans serif. And makes a massive difference. You don't take this seriously. You think this is the real answer. Crazy. In other words, it happens silently. The deepest version of fatherhood is when the child no longer needs protection or direction, yet the relationship persists as mutual recognition. In one line, a father's role is to help a human being move from dependency to capable participation in reality without losing their humanity. Not domination, not indulgence. Integration. Very cool. Very cool. A father who doesn't father isn't a father. Confucius insisted that moral clarity begins with linguistic clarity, calling things what they actually are. This is surprisingly relevant in an age of euphemism and spin. Euphemism. Reciprocity. Euphemism. Euphemism. What is euphemism? I think I know euphemism, but no, I don't think so. What is euphemism? Softer, yes, I think I know euphemism. Softer, more polite, or socially acceptable way of saying something that might otherwise feel harsh, blunt, or uncomfortable. Okay. Reciprocity is the single thread. Asked if there was one word that could guide a life, and Confucius said, "Shu." Reciprocity. Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself. This negative formulation of the golden rule is often considered more sophisticated than the positive version. Do unto others what you want to do unto you. Something like that. More sophisticated than the positive version because it requires less presumption about what others want. Tradition as living conversation. Confucius didn't see himself as an innovator. I transmit but do not create. Confucius didn't see himself as an innovator. I transmit but do not create. He saw his role as recovering and revitalizing what the ancients already knew, but this isn't rigid conservatism. It's the idea that wisdom is intergenerational, that you stand on the shoulders of those who came before and owe them the honesty of carrying their insights forward. Tradition as living conversation. Confucius didn't see himself as an innovator. I transmit but do not create. He saw his role as recovering and revitalizing what the ancients already knew. Wow. Confucius, back in 6th century, is saying that I am transmitting the work of the ancients. And today we are sitting over here, we are pretty much doing the same thing. We are transmitting, we are translating the work of the ancients. Wow. So Confucius pretty much is doing the same thing that we are doing today. Very cool. Very cool. Very interesting. Very interesting. So what are the ancient texts that Confucius is reading if today we are reading Confucius? Okay. I transmit but do not create. All right. Idea that wisdom is intergenerational, that you stand on the shoulders of those who came before and owe them the honesty of carrying their insights forward. Music and culture as moral forces. Confucius took music and poetry seriously, not as entertainment, but as technologies for shaping character. Wow. Music is a technology. I think it's pretty cool when people start talking this way that, hey, meditation is a technology. Meditation is a technology. We talk about weird technology. You talk about weird technologies, AI and stuff, but meditation is the real technology. Music is a technology. Poetry is a technology. Not as entertainment. Poetry is also very interesting because I went to a bookstore and I'm like, let me look at the poem. I like poems. I like a good poem. I am really into all the Hindi, what do we call them, shairi. I'm really into shairi. But it's hard to read the poetries of today because it doesn't make sense. Like, they are not rhyming and you're like, is this high quality or not? You don't know if it's high quality or not. You might think you are wasting your time because you are like, oh, maybe this is super smart and it's just that I'm dumb and I can understand it. But I think you have to also just rely on your own instincts that read it. Is it connecting with you or not? Took music and poetry seriously, not as entertainment, but as technologies for shaping character. A society's music reveals its moral condition. A society's music reveals its moral condition. This sounds quaint until you consider how profoundly media shapes consciousness today. How profoundly media shapes consciousness today. Moral courage without fanaticism. The Analects consistently values steadfastness but warns against rigidity. Confucius adapted his teachings to individual students. He valued the middle way, not Aristotle's golden mean exactly, but a similar instinct that extremes indicate something has gone wrong. Moral courage without fanaticism. The Analects consistently values steadfastness but warns against rigidity. Confucius adapted his teachings to individual students. He valued the middle way, not Aristotle's golden mean exactly, but a similar instinct that extremes indicate something has gone wrong. Govern by moral example, not force. If you govern with virtue and regulate with ritual, the people will have a sense of shame and correct themselves. If you govern with virtue and regulate with ritual, the people will have a sense of shame and correct themselves. Confucius believed that law and punishment were signs of failure. A well-ordered society shouldn't need them because its leaders would inspire good conduct by embodying it. Law and punishment were signs of failure. A well-ordered society shouldn't need them because its leaders would inspire good conduct by embodying it. The deepest contrast with the traditions you have been exploring, the Upanishads, the Buddha, and Lao Tzu, all ultimately point beyond society towards some transcendent or pre-social reality. Confucius stays resolutely within the human world. He was famously reluctant to discuss spirits, the afterlife, or metaphysics. You do not yet know life. How can you know death? Resolutely within the human world, he was famously reluctant to discuss spirits, the afterlife, or metaphysics. His wager is that the social fabric itself, when properly woven, is sacred enough. There is no need to escape the world if you can learn to inhabit it with full presence and mutual care. This makes him the odd one out among the great ancient sages, and perhaps the most challenging to a culture that romanticizes transcendence. What if enlightenment isn't about escaping our relationships, but about perfecting them? Yes, that's true. You're not supposed to be escaping. We're supposed to be making them happen, improving them. The Great Learning, Tao Xu, is one of the 4 books of Confucianism, originally a chapter of the Book of Rites, extracted and elevated by Zhu Shi in 12th century into a standalone foundational text. Barely a few pages, yet it contains what might be the most compressed political philosophy ever written. The 8 steps. Sequential logic that moves from the interior to the exterior. Investigation of things. Investigation of things. Extension of knowledge. Sincerity of thought. Rectification of the heart. Cultivation of the self. Regulation of the family. Governance of the state. Peace throughout the world. Wow. Okay. Investigation of things. Okay, we gotta change the setup a bit. Alright, let's see. Investigation of things. Extension of knowledge. Sincerity of thought. Rectification of the heart. Cultivation of the self. Regulation of the family. Governance of the state. Peace throughout the world. Sincerity of thought, rectification of the heart, cultivation of the self, regulation of the family, governance of the state, peace throughout the world. That's it. That's the whole architecture. Everything else in the text is commentary on the sequence, and the radical claim is that these aren't 8 separate projects, they are one movement. You can't skip steps. The root is self-cultivation. From the Son of Heaven down to the common people, all must regard cultivation of the self as the root. From the Son of Heaven down to the common people, all must regard cultivation of the self as the root. Cultivation of self as the root. This is a staggering statement in a hierarchical society. The emperor and the peasant share the same fundamental obligation. Political authority without inner work is illegitimate. Political authority without inner work is illegitimate. Sincerity as the hinge. The text spends disproportionate attention on Ching, sincerity or authenticity, making thoughts sincere. Means not deceiving yourself. The great learning says that when you are alone, you know exactly what you're doing and why. Self-deception is the point where the entire chain breaks. You can cultivate what you won't honestly see. This connects to a striking image in the text, the idea that inner states are visible, whether you want them to be or not. What is truly within will be manifest without. Pretense is always eventually transparent. Wealth decorates a house, virtue decorates a person. You can't fake the latter any more than the former. Investigation of things as starting point. This became one of the most debated concepts in all of Chinese philosophy. What does investigating things, Givu, actually mean? Zhu Xi said it meant studying the external world, examining phenomena to discover principle. Wang Yangming, centuries later, said it meant rectifying the mind's relationship to things. An inward turn. That single ambiguity generated centuries of philosophical argument and 2 entire schools of Neo-Confucianism. Wealth follows virtue, not the reverse. The text's final section deals with economics, and the claim is counterintuitive. A state that pursues profit directly will lose both profit and virtue. A state that pursues profit directly will lose both profit and virtue. A state that pursues virtue will gain both. Virtue is the root, wealth is the branches. The ruler who hoards wealth scatters the people. The ruler who scatters wealth gathers the people. Wow. The ruler who hoards wealth scatters the people. The ruler who scatters wealth gathers the people. Wealth follows virtue, not the reverse. Investigation of things as starting point. This became one of the most debated concepts. Rectifying the mind's relationship to things, an inward turn. That single ambiguity generated centuries of philosophical argument in 2 entire schools of Neo-Confucianism. A state that pursues profit directly will lose both profit and virtue. A state that pursues virtue will gain both. No private morality. The great learning collapses the distinction between personal ethics and political responsibility in a way that neither Western liberalism nor most spiritual traditions do. Your inability to manage your anger at the breakfast table isn't a private failing, it's a political one, because it ripples outward through every sphere you touch. Through every sphere you touch, the people as mirror. Never has there been a case where the ruler loved humaneness and the people did not love righteousness. Never has there been a case where the ruler loved humaneness and the people did not love righteousness. The state of a society directly reflects the character of its leaders. The state of a society directly reflects the character of its leaders. This isn't idealism, it's the Confucian diagnostic tool. If things are broken in the state, look first at the ruler's self-cultivation, not at policy. If things are broken in the state, look first at the ruler's self-cultivation, not at policy, renovating the people. The text quotes the inscription on King Tang's bathing basin: renew yourself daily and again, daily and every day renew again. Self-cultivation isn't a one-time achievement but a continuous process. The great learning treats moral life as maintenance, not construction. You don't build a self and then inhabit it. You keep cleaning the mirror. Self-cultivation isn't a one-time achievement but a continuous process. The great learning treats moral life as maintenance, not construction. Maintenance, not construction. The text's genius is its refusal to let you compartmentalize. The modern instinct is to separate inner life from outer action, private development from public responsibility, personal psychology from political structures. These separations are the illusion. Your meditation practice and your governance are one thing. Your sincerity, when no one's watching, and the peace of the world are one thing. Where this gets interesting against the traditions you have been tracing, the Buddha and Lao Tzu would both question whether peace throughout the world is the right telos. The Buddha might say the world is dukkha and the point is liberation, not its perfection. Lao Tzu would say the very ambition to bring peace to the world is the kind of striving that prevents peace. Doubles down on the Confucian wager: the world is the arena, not the obstacle. The world is the arena, not the obstacle. And if your inner work doesn't eventually manifest as a more just and harmonious society, it wasn't real inner work, it was just private luxury. Investigation of things, extension of knowledge, sincerity of thought, rectification of the heart, cultivation of the self, regulation of the family, governance of the state, peace throughout the world. Investigation of things, extension of knowledge, sincerity of thought, rectification of the heart, cultivation of the self, regulation of the family, governance of the state, peace throughout the world. Investigation, extension, sincerity, rectification, cultivation, regulation, governance, peace. Tell me more. King Tang's bathing basin: renew yourself daily and again daily, and every day renew again. Self-cultivation isn't a one-time achievement but a continuous process. The great learning treats moral life as maintenance, not construction. Most evocative images in all Confucian literature. King Tang was the founder of the Shang dynasty. According to tradition, he had these words inscribed on his bathing basin, the vessel he used every morning to wash himself. The physical act as philosophical metaphor. Every morning you wash off yesterday's dirt. Tang turned this mundane act into a spiritual commitment. Just as the body accumulates grime, the mind accumulates complacency, self-deception, lazy habits of thought. The basin is a mirror that asks you each morning: are you actually awake, or are you repeating? Are you just repeating yesterday? The triple repetition matters. Renew yourself daily would have been sufficient as a principle, but the inscription says it 3 times with escalating emphasis: daily and again daily, and every day renew again. This isn't poetic redundancy, it's acknowledging how relentless the pull toward stagnation is. You don't defeat entropy once, you defeat it every single morning, and the moment you think you have won, you've already started losing. Renew yourself daily would have been sufficient as a principle, but the inscription says it 3 times with escalating emphasis: daily and again daily, and every day renew again. Renewal, not revolution. The Chinese character Xin means new or renew. Isn't saying destroy yourself and start over. He's saying polish, remove what's accumulated, return to what's fresh underneath. It's closer to Michelangelo's idea that the sculpture already exists inside the marble. The daily work is removal, not addition. Michelangelo, idea that the sculpture already exists inside the marble. The daily work is removal, not addition. A king inscribing it on a basin, not a throne. Anywhere, a palace wall, a crown, a weapon, he put them on washing basin. The most private, most humble, most routine object in his life. The implication is that self-renewal isn't a grand public declaration. It happens in the smallest daily rituals, in the moments nobody sees. This connects directly to the great learning's emphasis on sincerity when alone. The Shendu concept, watchfulness in solitude. The political dimension, Tang overthrew the corrupt Shia dynasty. He was a revolutionary who founded a new order. So renew carries political weight too. A ruler must continuously renew not just himself but the mandate, the institutions, the relationship with the people. The moment a ruler coasts on past achievements, decay begins. Legitimacy is re-earned every morning, or it isn't legitimacy at all. Continuously renew not just himself but the mandate, the institutions, the relationship with the people. The moment a ruler coasts on past achievements, decay begins. Legitimacy is re-earned every morning. When Zhu Shi extracted the great learning and made it the first text every student should read, this inscription became foundational. Isn't a phase you complete, it's the permanent condition of being human. There's no graduation. There's a beautiful convergence across traditions here. The Buddha's final words: work out your own salvation with diligence. Carry the same sense of unfinished, ongoing effort. Daily practice without achievement to results points the same direction. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence asks essentially Tang's question: could you live this day again exactly as it is, and affirm it? Most grounded of all of them. No metaphysics, no cosmology, no eschatology. Just a basin, water, and the discipline to show up tomorrow and wash off whatever accumulated overnight. The profundity is in the simplicity. Meaning of eschatology: study of lost things, the end of the world, the fate of humanity, what happens after death, the ultimate destiny of reality itself. Comes from the Greek eschatos, meaning lost or final. Apocalypse, heaven, hell, final judgment, cosmic cycles ending, the ultimate future of consciousness. Christianity, second coming, final judgment. Islam, day of resurrection. Hinduism, Kali Yuga ending and cosmic dissolution. Decline of Dharma and future Buddha. Maitreya. Interesting. Okay. Epic literature. Mortality and meaning. Mythical and esoteric: Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and the Hermetica. The Tibetan Book of the Dead. Key takeaways of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Tibetan Book of the Dead. Let's see. The Bardo Thodol, liberation through hearing during the intermediate state. Attributed to Padmasambhav in the 8th century and was concealed as a Dharma treasure text to be discovered when humanity was ready. Wow. Concealed as a Dharma to be discovered when humanity was ready. It's a manual read aloud to the dying and the recently dead, a guidebook for the consciousness navigating between one life and the next. Death is not an event but a process. The Western conception treats death as binary, alive then not. The Bardo Todol describes death as an extended transition through distinct phases, each with its own character, its own dangers, its own opportunities. Consciousness doesn't switch off. It enters a series of intermediate states, bardos, where everything that happens is a function of what the mind has trained itself to do. Death as a binary, alive then not. The Bardo Todol describes death as an extended transition through distinct phases, its own dangers, its own opportunities. Consciousness doesn't switch off. It enters a series of intermediate states where everything that happens is really cool. Wow. Where everything that happens is a function of what the mind has trained itself to do. Okay, water break. All right. Where are we at? Death is not an event but a process. The Western conception treats death as a binary, alive then not. The Bardo Todol describes death as an extended transition through distinct phases, each with its own character, its own dangers, its own opportunities. Consciousness doesn't switch off. It enters a series of intermediate states where everything that happens is a function of what the mind has. Everything that happens is a function of what the mind has trained itself to do. There are three bardos after death. The Chikai Bardo, the moment of death itself. Here the mind encounters the clear light of reality, the ground luminosity, the naked nature of awareness with no content whatsoever. Wow. The Chikai. Let's see. The Chikai Bardo, the moment of death itself. Here the mind encounters the clear light of reality, the ground luminosity, the naked nature of awareness with no content whatsoever. This is the highest opportunity for liberation if you recognize this light as your own mind, not something external, not something other. You are liberated instantly. Most people don't. They recoil from it because they have never experienced awareness without an object, and the sheer intensity is terrifying. Most people don't. They recoil from it because they have never experienced awareness without an object, and the sheer intensity is terrifying. Recognize this light as your own mind. You are liberated instantly. The Chonyid Bardo, the experience of reality over roughly 14 days, symbolically, not literally. The consciousness encounters a sequence of peaceful and wrathful deities. The peaceful ones appear first, radiant, luminous, beautiful. Then the wrathful ones, horrifying, blood-drinking, surrounded by flames. The text's central revelation is that both are projections of your own mind. The peaceful deities are your own wisdom. The wrathful deities are your own wisdom in its fierce form. Liberation is still possible at every stage if you recognize this, but the untrained mind keeps flinching, keeps treating the visions as real and external, keeps running. Keeps treating the visions as real and external, keeps running. The Sitpa Bardo, the Bardo of becoming. If you have failed to recognize the previous visions, consciousness now begins to solidify again. You start experiencing a mental body, wind, hallucinations, and eventually the pull toward rebirth. The Bardo of becoming. If you have failed to recognize the previous visions, consciousness now begins to solidify again. You start experiencing a mental body, wind, hallucinations, and eventually the pull toward rebirth. You see couples copulating and are drawn towards specific wombs based on your karmic propensities. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Even here, text offers techniques for choosing a favorable rebirth or blocking an unfavorable one. This is really cool. A mental body, wind, hallucinations, and eventually the pull toward rebirth. You see couples copulating and are drawn towards specific wombs based on your karmic propensities. The text offers techniques for choosing a favorable rebirth or blocking an unfavorable one. Recognition is the only skill that matters. The entire text reduces to one instruction repeated in 100 variations. Recognize what's appearing as your own mind. That's it. Recognize what's appearing as your own mind. It's your own mind. That's it. Every deity, every light, every terror, every seduction, it's all you. The failure mode isn't sin or unworthiness. It's simply not recognizing. The untrained mind mistakes its own projections for external reality and reacts to them with attraction or aversion, which generates the momentum toward rebirth. Recognize what's appearing as your own mind. That's it. Every deity, every light, every terror, every seduction, it's all you. The failure mode isn't sin or unworthiness. It's simply not recognizing. The untrained mind mistakes its own projections for external reality and reacts to them with attraction or aversion, which generates the momentum toward rebirth. Life is also a bardo, the text implies, and later commentaries make explicit that the bardo between death and rebirth is structurally identical to the bardo of waking life. Right now you're in a bardo. Right now everything you perceive is mind appearing to itself. The text implies, and later commentaries make explicit, that the bardo between death and rebirth is structurally identical to the bardo of waking life. Right now you're in a bardo. Right now everything you perceive is mind appearing to itself. The difference is that in life the projections are stabilized and slow moving enough to seem solid. In death the projections are rapid, vivid, and overwhelming. But the principle is the same, and the skill is the same: recognition. Fear is the mechanism of bondage. The text describes consciousness fleeing from brilliant lights, which represent liberation, toward dim, seductive lights, which represent rebirth into lower realms. This is perhaps the most psychologically devastating observation in the entire text. When liberation presents itself, it's too bright, too intense, too ego-dissolving, and we instinctively run toward what's comfortable and familiar, even when what's familiar is suffering. Preparation is everything. The Bardo Thodol isn't really a book for the dead. It's a book for the living. The entire point is to familiarize yourself with these states before death, so that when they arise, recognition is automatic. This is why Tibetan Buddhist practice includes deity visualization, dream yoga, and meditation on the nature of mind. They are all rehearsals for death. You practice recognizing appearances as mind, so that when the ultimate test comes, the skill is already there. When the ultimate test comes, the skill is already there. Karma as momentum, not punishment. The text doesn't present karma as a cosmic justice system. It's closer to physics. Your habitual patterns of thought and reaction create momentum. Karma is momentum. Momentum. It's closer to physics. Reaction creates momentum. That momentum carries through death and determines how you navigate the bardoes. A mind trained in recognition moves through them freely. A mind trained in reactivity gets dragged by its own habits into whatever rebirth those habits attract. The wrathful deities are not enemies. This is one of the most profound elements. The terrifying deities, Heruka, with his skull cup of blood, the animal-headed Dakinis, are not punishments or demons. They are the same wisdom as the peaceful deities, just appearing in a form that matches the intensity of the perceiver's confusion. Wisdom doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it has to scream. Sound, light, and rays as primary phenomena. Before forms coalesce into recognizable deities, the text describes pure sound, pure light, and pure color as the fundamental expressions of reality. This is remarkably consistent with certain interpretations of physics, that what we call matter is ultimately patterns of energy, vibration, frequency. The Barot Hodol was describing reality as luminous energy long before quantum mechanics suggested something similar. The text is read aloud because hearing persists. The tradition holds that even after the body dies, the consciousness retains the capacity to hear. This is why a lama reads the text to the deceased. It serves as a voice cutting through the confusion, reminding the consciousness of what is practiced in life. "Oh, nobly born, remember," is a recurring refrain. It's a rescue mission conducted through language. Upanishadic conviction, fundamental nature of reality is consciousness itself. Everything is mind-made. Provides a phenomenological map of what happens when the mind is stripped of its body and left alone with its own contents. It's the most extreme test case of the principle. Every tradition points toward that what you perceive is what you are. Connection to Lao Tzu here too. Soft overcomes the hard, that yielding is power. The mind that can relax into the clear light, that doesn't tense against its own dissolution, passes through. The mind that grips, that insists on solidity, on self, on something to hold, that mind falls back into form. Liberation and bondage are separated by nothing more than the difference between opening and clenching. Ancient texts on expanding your mind. Generally dangerous, aren't just describing reality but offering technologies for altering how you perceive it. Entire science of consciousness modification, the second sutra says everything. Yoga Chit Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is a cessation of the fluctuations of the mind, not relaxation, not flexibility, not wellness. The complete stilling of mental activity so that the perceiver rests in its own nature. Patanjali then maps out siddhis, powers that emerge as byproducts of deep practice, knowledge of past lives, reading others' minds, becoming invisible, levitating. He mentions these almost casually and then warns that attachment to them is itself a trap. The powers are distractions from the actual goal, which is Kaivalya, absolute isolation of pure awareness from everything it has ever identified with. The Upanishads, particularly the Mandukya, the broader Upanishadic tradition, but the Mandukya deserves a special attention here. It's only 12 verses. It maps consciousness across 4 states: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, Turiya. Awareness in which the other 3 appear and disappear. You already experience the ground of reality every night in deep sleep. You just don't know it because there's no ego present to register it. The entire project of mind expansion from its perspective isn't about adding new experiences, it's about being conscious during states you already passed through unconsciously. Western esoteric thought for 2 millennia, as above, so below, as below, so above. The microcosm mirrors the macrocosm. Your mind isn't in the universe. Your mind is the universe in miniature. Your mind isn't in the universe. Your mind is the universe in miniature. The Hermetic tradition that grew from this treated consciousness expansion as a process of recognizing correspondences between inner states and cosmic structures. Alchemy, the transformation of lead into gold, was always primarily a metaphor for the transformation of base consciousness into illuminated awareness. The Ashtavakra Gita, one of the most radical texts in any tradition. Ashtavakra and King Janak bypasses every gradual method and goes straight to the end point. You are already liberated. There is nothing to do. The mind doesn't need expanding. It needs to be recognized as infinite right now. You're not the body. You're not the mind. You are awareness itself. Where Patanjali gives you an 8-step program, Ashtavakra says the program is the problem. Every step you take toward liberation is a step that reinforces the illusion that you are not already there. It's the most vertigo-inducing text in the Vedantic canon. Wow. Path of Purification by Buddha Ghosh. The Visuddhimagga, the Theravada Buddhist counterpart to Patanjali, a massive systematic manual of meditation technology. It maps out the jhana, its absorption states, with extraordinary precision. First jhana, applied and sustained attention, rapture, happiness, one-pointedness. Second jhana, rapture, happiness, one-pointedness. Applied attention drops, and so on through progressively subtler states until you reach the formless jhana, infinitive space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception. Each state is described with the clinical detail of a lab manual. It's not mysticism, it's engineering. Attributed to Padmasambhav, like the Bardo Thodo, but focused on the living rather than the dying. Its core teaching is Rigpa, direct recognition of awareness itself, without content, without modification, without effort. The text insists that the mind in its natural state is already enlightened. Every attempt to meditate, to improve, to expand is a contraction away from what's already the case. The mind is not to be sought externally. Is perhaps the clearest articulation of the Dzogchen view, that the highest practice is no practice at all, just naked seeing. The I Ching, not a consciousness manual in the obvious sense, but something subtler. The 64 hexagrams map the fundamental patterns of change. When you consult the I Ching, you're not predicting the future, you are training the mind to perceive the quality of a moment, the way a situation is moving, the phase of a cycle. Over time, the practice restructures perception itself. You stop seeing static objects and start seeing dynamic processes. Reality becomes verbal rather than nominal. Not things but happenings. This is mind expansion that doesn't announce itself. The Zohar, the central text of Kabbalah, attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but likely composed by Moses de Leon, 13th century Spain, treats the Torah not as a historical or legal document, but as a coded map of divine consciousness. The 10 Sephirot describe the structure of God's self-manifestation, and since humans are made in God's image, they also describe the structure of the human psyche. Kabbalistic practice involves ascending through these levels, which is simultaneously a journey upward through the cosmic tree and inward through layers of the self. The Corpus Hermeticum, the full collection of Hermetic dialogues, expanding on the Emerald Tablet. Dialogue 1 describes a visionary experience where the narrator's mind expands to encompass the entire cosmos, witness creation from the inside, and then returns fundamentally altered to ordinary consciousness. It's one of the earliest phenomenological accounts of what would now be called a mystical experience. Describe its surprising sobriety. De Rerum Natura, On the Nature of Things by Lucretius, the outlier on this list. Poem. No gods, no mysticism, no transcendence, yet it expands the mind by a different mechanism entirely. Scale. Infinite atoms falling through infinite void, forming infinite worlds. He zooms out until human concerns become absurd and zooms in until the invisible becomes vivid. He cures the fear of death, not through afterlife promises, but through materialistic logic. You didn't suffer before you were born, and you won't suffer after you die. It's mind expansion through radical disenchantment, and for some temperaments it liberates more effectively than any mystical text. What threads through all of these is the shared suspicion that ordinary waking consciousness is a dramatic narrowing of what awareness actually is. They differ on what lies beyond the narrowing. Brahman, Rigpa, Tao, Saphirwood, infinite atoms, but they agree that the default human experience is a fraction of what's available. The disagreement is really about method. Do you still the mind? Investigate it. Recognize it as already complete. Dissolve it in devotion, or simply see through its pretensions. Do you still the mind? Investigate it. Recognize it as already complete. Dissolve it in devotion, or simply see through its pretensions. Given the philosophical instruments you build, technology can restructure perception over time without the user ever noticing it's happening. That's essentially what your best tools do. They don't tell people to think differently. They create conditions where thinking differently is the only option. I'm really interested in the Ashtavakra Gita. Key takeaways of Ashtavakra Gita. Ashtavakra. The sage, born physically deformed, his name meaning 8 bends, King Janak of Videha, or Videh. It's probably composed between the 1st and 3rd century CE, though dating is disputed. Most uncompromising text in the entire Advaita Vedanta tradition. Where other texts guide you up a staircase, this one kicks the staircase out from under you and says you were always already at the top. You are pure awareness, full stop. The text opens with Janak asking how to attain knowledge, liberation, detachment. Immediate and total. You are not the body. You are not the mind. You are not the doer. You are awareness. Boundless, formless, unchanging. This isn't presented as something to achieve, it's presented as something to notice. The gap between you and liberation is entirely imaginary. The gap between you and liberation is entirely imaginary. The body is not yours, not in the ascetic sense of reject the body, but in the observational sense. You can watch the body. You can watch it age, hurt, move. Whatever is watching is not the thing being watched. Ashtavakra extends this ruthlessly. You can watch thoughts, so you are not thoughts. You can watch emotions, so you are not emotions. You can watch the sense of I, so you're not even the ego. What remains when you strip everything observable away, that remainder, which isn't a thing at all, is what you are. Which isn't a thing at all is what you are. Practice is the disease posing as the cure. Is the disease posing as the cure? This is where the text gets generally destabilizing. Most spiritual traditions give you something to do: meditate, pray, study, serve. Every practice reinforces the assumption that you are not already free. The meditator who sits for enlightenment is asserting with every session that enlightenment is elsewhere, later, not yet. The very effort creates the distance it's trying to close. It's like running toward a horizon. Bondage is nothing but the belief is bondage. There are no actual chains. There is no actual ignorance in the way a rock is ignorant. There is only the thought, I am bound, which awareness believes and then experiences are real. Stop believing the thought and bondage evaporates. Not gradually, not after years of practice, but instantly. The way a dream ends when you wake up. The dream was never real, neither was the bondage. Bondage is nothing but the belief in bondage. There are no actual chains. There is no actual ignorance in the way a rock is ignorant. There is only the thought, I am bound, which awareness believes and then experiences are real. Experiences as real. Stop believing the thought and bondage evaporates. Not gradually, not after years of practice, but instantly. The way a dream ends when you wake up. The dream was never real, neither was the bondage. The world is not denied, it's reclassified. Ashtavakra doesn't say the world doesn't exist. He says it has the same ontological status as a reflection in a mirror. The mirror is real. The reflection appears in the mirror, but the reflection doesn't do anything to the mirror. Doesn't stain it, scratch it, improve it. You are the mirror. Experience appears in you. You remain untouched. The world is not denied, it's reclassified. Ashtavakra doesn't say the world doesn't exist. He says it has the same ontological status as a reflection in a mirror. The mirror is real. The reflection appears in the mirror, but the reflection doesn't do anything to the mirror. Doesn't stain it, scratch it, improve it. You are the mirror. Experience appears in you. You remain untouched. The mirror is real. Desire and aversion are the same movement. Wanting something and fearing something are both forms of the mind reaching outward, asserting that awareness needs something it doesn't currently have. Ashtavakra treats them as identical. The renunciant who avoids pleasure is as bound. Wow. The renunciant who avoids pleasure is as bound as the hedonist who chases it. Both are organizing their lives around objects. True freedom is indifference, not suppression, not detachment achieved through effort, but the natural disinterest that arises when you recognize that nothing external can add to or subtract from what you already are. Wow. Desire and aversion are the same movement. Wanting something and fearing something are both forms of the mind reaching outward, asserting that awareness needs something it doesn't currently have. Ashtavakra treats them as identical. The renunciant who avoids pleasure is as bound as the hedonist who chases it. Both are organizing their lives around objects. True freedom is indifference, not suppression, not attachment achieved through effort, but the natural disinterest that arises when you recognize that nothing external can add to or subtract from what you already are. But the natural disinterest that arises when you recognize that nothing external can add to or subtract from what you already are. I like this one. True freedom is indifference. True freedom is indifference. Not suppression, not detachment achieved through effort, but the natural disinterest that arises when you recognize that nothing external can add to or subtract from what you already are. Janaka's response: spontaneous liberation. Spontaneous liberation. What makes the text structurally remarkable is Janaka's reaction. He doesn't say, I'll try that. He doesn't ask follow-up questions about technique, he simply gets it. His next verses describe the direct experience of liberation. I am boundless, like the ocean, and the universe rises and falls like a wave within me. The text is suggesting that understanding is liberation, not understanding as intellectual comprehension, but understanding as recognition, the same recognition the bardo Torah demands at the moment of death, except Ashtavakra says you don't need to die first. Spontaneous liberation. What makes the text structurally remarkable is Janaka's reaction. He doesn't say, I'll try that. He doesn't ask follow-up questions about technique. He simply gets it. His next verses describe the direct experience of liberation. I am boundless like the ocean, and the universe rises and falls like a wave within me. The text is suggesting that understanding is liberation, not understanding as intellectual comprehension, but understanding as recognition, the same recognition Bardo Thodol demands at the moment of death. He simply gets it. I'm boundless like the ocean, and the universe rises and falls like a wave within me. Action continues, but ownership dissolves. Very interesting. Action continues, but ownership dissolves. The liberated person still acts, the body still moves, speaks, eats, but there is no one claiming authorship. Actions happen the way weather happens, without a doer behind them. This is similar to the Gita's teaching on action without attachment, but Ashtavakra goes further. Krishna tells Arjuna to act without clinging to results. Krishna tells Arjuna to act without clinging to results. Ashtavakra tells Janak there is no one to act and no one to cling. No one to act and no one to cling. The Gita modifies the relationship between self and action. The Ashtavakra Gita dissolves both. Happiness is your nature, not your reward. Bliss isn't something you earn through spiritual achievement. It's what's left when you stop obscuring it. The analogy the tradition uses. The sun doesn't become bright when clouds move away. It was always bright. The clouds were the only problem, and they were never substantial enough to actually affect the sun. Your natural state is anand, not excitement, not pleasure, but the uncaused contentment of awareness resting in itself. The sage is beyond virtue and vice. Ashtavakra describes a liberated person in terms that would scandalize most moral traditions. The sage is beyond good and evil, beyond merit and sin, beyond purity and impurity. This isn't amorality. It's the recognition that moral categories apply to the person, the doer, the social self, and the sage has seen through all of those. It doesn't mean the sage behaves badly. It means the sage's behavior doesn't arise from the moral calculus of I should or I shouldn't, but from the spontaneous movement of awareness without agenda. Is beyond virtue and vice. It means the sage's behavior doesn't arise from the moral calculus of I should or I shouldn't, but from the spontaneous movement of awareness without agenda. Stillness, not silence. The text repeatedly returns to the image of stillness, but it's not the stillness of a quieted mind that would still be an achievement, a state. It's the stillness that was never disturbed in the first place. The ocean's surface has waves. The ocean's depths are still. The depths were never affected by the surface activity. You are the depths. Depths. You were never disturbed by any experience, any thought, any trauma. The disturbance was only ever on the surface, and the surface was only ever an appearance in you. The text repeatedly returns to the image of stillness, but it's not the stillness of a quieted mind that would still be an achievement, a state. It's a stillness that was never disturbed in the first place. The ocean's surface has waves. The ocean's depths are still. The depths were never affected by the surface activity. You are the depths. You were never disturbed by any experience, any thought, any trauma. The disturbance was only ever on the surface, and the surface was only ever an appearance in you. The text undermines itself. In the final chapters, even the teaching is discarded. Ashtavakra essentially says everything I've told you is also just words appearing in awareness. Don't make a new identity out of being someone who knows they are awareness. Don't trade the chains of ignorance for the chains of spirituality. Let go of the teaching the same way you let go of everything else. The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. And once you have seen the moon, staring at the finger is absurd. And once you have seen the moon, staring at the finger is absurd. The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon, and once you have seen the moon, staring at the finger is absurd. Ashtavakra's body is teaching. There is something the text never makes explicit, but which the tradition holds as essential. Ashtavakra was born with 8 deformities. His body was twisted, broken, socially repulsive. And he's the teacher, not the handsome prince, not the ascetic with the perfect posture. The person whose body most violently contradicts any identification with form is the one who teaches that you are not form. His body is the first lesson before he opens his mouth. Gita, Bhagavad Gita. Gita just means song, Geet, Bhagavad Geet, Bhagavad, Bhagwan, God's song. And Ashtavakra Geet is Ashtavakra's song. Is the text that every other text on this journey has been approaching from different angles. Dhammapada says train the mind. Patanjali says still the mind. The Bharat Thodol says recognize the mind's projections. Lao Tzu says stop interfering. Confucius says perfect your conduct. The great learning says cultivate yourself outward. The Ashtavakra Gita stands behind all of them and asks who is the one doing all of this. Find that one. Look for the looker. And when you can't find anything, not because you have failed, but because there was never anything to find, that absence, that openness, that ungraspable nothingness, that's what you've been looking for. And it's what was looking all along. I trying to see itself. And the Ashtavakra's answer is stop trying. The seeing is already happening. You're already it. If Ashtavakra was living in a modern world, what occupation would he choose to do based on his philosophy? Based on his philosophy. I'm curious, let's see. Ashtavakra. This is a beautiful thought experiment, and the honest answer might be uncomfortable. You probably wouldn't choose an occupation at all. Choice implies a chooser, a preference, a future self you're building toward. Ashtavakra would see the entire concept of career as a fiction, the idea that you are what you do, that your work defines you, that you need a role to justify your existence. He would find the question itself amusing. But bodies need to eat, so something would happen. And given his philosophy, here's what probably wouldn't and would look like. What he wouldn't do. He wouldn't be a spiritual teacher in the modern sense. No retreats, no subscription model, no brand. The moment teaching becomes an identity, it's bondage, wearing robes. He would find the wellness industry viscerally absurd, selling people techniques to become what they already are. Meditation apps would strike him as someone selling you your own breath. He wouldn't be an academic philosopher. The apparatus of argument, citation, peer review, tenure, all of it assumes that truth is something you arrive at through accumulation. He would see the entire university as an elaborate mechanism for avoiding direct seeing. Wow. The apparatus of argument, citation, peer review, tenure, all of it assumes that truth is something you arrive at through accumulation. He would see the entire university as an elaborate mechanism for avoiding direct seeing. He wouldn't be an activist or a politician, not because he doesn't care about suffering, but because the frame of I must fix the world presupposes a broken world and a separate fixer. Both are illusions he's already seen through. What might actually happen, something mundane, radically mundane. The idea of Ashtavakra's philosophy is that it points toward the most ordinary life imaginable, because no occupation is more spiritual than any other. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy what's happening over here. If Claude is thinking about academic philosophers and all these guys who come up with these reports and stuff like that, that is crazy. That is crazy, because he's basically saying that all these researchers, after all the work that they do, they finally come to the same conclusion. They finally come to the most basic conclusion of how our ancestors used to live. That, hey, you need 8 hours of sleep. Hey, when you wake up, go look at the sun, be in the sunlight. Hey, spend time with people. Spend time having conversations with people. This is it. Something mundane, radically mundane. The irony of Ashtavakra's philosophy is that it points toward the most ordinary life imaginable, because no occupation is more spiritual than any other. Washing dishes is as much awareness, being aware of itself, as a deep meditation. If we take the textual clues seriously, a few possibilities emerge. A night janitor. Wow. A comedian. Oh my God. A night janitor. There's something fitting about this invisible work. No audience, no identity construction. The building gets clean. Nobody knows who did it. The janitor doesn't care. His body, deformed, socially dismissed, would be invisible in exactly the way that allows total freedom. Lao Tzu's best leader is barely known to exist. Ashtavakra's sage is barely known to exist. A janitor at 2 a.m. is barely known to exist. A comedian, this is the less obvious answer, but possibly the most accurate. Ashtavakra's teaching style is already comedic. He keeps pointing out the absurdity of seeking what you already have. Comedy at its deepest is the art of revealing that the structure you thought was solid is actually hollow. The comedian stands on stage and dismantles shared illusions in real time. And crucially, comedy doesn't ask you to believe anything, it just shows you something, and if you see it, you laugh. Recognition, not doctrine, and a deformed body on a comedy stage. The audience's discomfort would itself be the first teaching. You came to see a show and instead got confronted with your own assumptions about what a person should look like. a hospice worker. He would be extraordinary with the dying, not because he would offer comfort, he would offer something more dangerous, presence without the desperate need to fix. Most people around the dying radiate anxiety because death threatens their own self-concept. Ashtavakra has no self-concept to threaten. He could sit with someone dissolving and not flinch, because he would see it the way you see a wave returning to the ocean, not tragic, not beautiful, just what's happening. The dying might find this unbearable, or they might find it the first honest company they've had in months. First honest company they've had in months. I think that's true. When somebody has cancer, they don't want to be always in a conversation where people are feeling sad for themselves, for them. Sometimes they just want people who can just talk to them as if they're normal and not someone who has cancer. A street artist who erases his own work, makes something extraordinary on the sidewalk in chalk, and then watches it rain away or sweep it up himself. The creation matters no more than the destruction. Someone asks why he would destroy something beautiful, and he says nothing was destroyed because nothing was created. This is basically a Tibetan sand mandala, but without the Buddhism, without the tradition, without the framework that turns it into a spiritual practice. Just a guy drawing and undoing and drawing again. This would be pretty cool. It's like if you have a wall that needs to be painted, you could be like, hey, for one day, I'm first of all going to paint it a most beautiful painting on it. For another day, it's going to be up there so people can come around, appreciate the beauty, click pictures. And on the third day, I'll paint it white. So it's gone. But here's the real answer. Ashtavakra in the modern world would be unrecognizable as a sage. That's the whole point. He wouldn't have a podcast. He wouldn't have followers. He wouldn't write books. He might work at a gas station and say something once to a customer that rearranges their entire inner life, and neither of them would frame it as a spiritual transmission. The customer would drive away confused, and Ashtavakra would forget it happened. He would be the person you would walk past every single day and never notice, and he would say that's exactly right, because what you are looking for was never in another person, it was in the looking itself. He would be the person you would walk past every single day and never notice, and he would say that's exactly right, because what you're looking for was never in another person, it was in the looking itself. The deepest joke of the thought experiment is this. Ashtavakra's philosophy implies that he's already here, everywhere, in everyone. The awareness reading these words right now is the same awareness Ashtavakra pointed to. He didn't need a special occupation because awareness doesn't have an occupation. It just watches occupations happen. Just watches occupations happen. You are pure awareness, full stop. How to attain knowledge, liberation, detachment? Ashtavakra's response is immediate and total. You are not the body. You are not the mind. You are not the doer. You are awareness, boundless, formless, unchanging. The I Ching. The emerald. Key takeaways of the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. Most influential text per word ever written. Somewhere between a dozen and 20 lines depending on the translation. Its origin is generally mysterious. The earliest known version appears in Arabic around 8th century, attributed to Balinus, Apollonius of Tyana, who claims to have found it in a tomb beneath the statue of Hermes, clutched in the clutched in the hands of a corpse. Whether it's Egyptian, Greek, Arabic, or something older, that pass through all three is unresolved and maybe unresolvable. As above, so below, as below, so above. The most famous line in Western esotericism. It's not a vague mystical platitude, it's a structural claim about reality. The macrocosm and microcosm mirror each other perfectly. The patterns governing galaxies govern atoms. The patterns governing galaxies govern atoms. The structure of the cosmos is replicated in the structure of the human being. This means that by knowing yourself fully, you know the universe, and by studying the universe, you discover yourself. The structure of the cosmos is replicated in the structure of the human being. This means that by knowing yourself fully, you know the universe. The structure of the cosmos is replicated in the structure of the human being. This means that by knowing yourself fully, you know the universe, and by studying the universe, you discover yourself. And collapses the distinction between inner and outer investigation. Physics and meditation are the same project conducted from opposite ends. Physics and meditation are the same project conducted from opposite ends. This principle directly influenced the development of astrology. Planetary movements mirror human psychology. Alchemy. Material transformation mirrors spiritual transformation. This principle directly influenced the development of astrology. Planetary movements mirror human psychology. Alchemy. Material transformation mirrors spiritual transformation. And even early science. Newton. I want to check out alchemy. We'll watch a video of alchemy. What is alchemy? Material transformation. And Paracelsus all took it seriously as a methodological premise. The one thing. The tablet speaks of a single source from which everything emanates. The father of it is the sun. The mother of it is the moon. The wind carried it in its belly. The earth is its nurse. This isn't mythology, it's cosmogony, compressed into metaphor. There is one fundamental reality. It differentiates into polarities: sun, moon, masculine, feminine, active, receptive, and from those polarities the multiplicity of the world is born. But the multiplicity never stops being the one thing in disguise. The parallel with Advaita Vedanta is almost exact. Brahman appearing as the world without ceasing to be Brahman. The parallel with the Tao is equally close, the Tao that gives birth to the 10,000 things. The Emerald Tablet is the Western version of the same perennial insight, but expressed in alchemical rather than philosophical language. Separation and reunion as the fundamental operation. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. The tablet describes a process of analysis, taking the unified reality apart into its components, followed by synthesis, reuniting them at a higher level. I think it's so important to also music. Music is so important. Brahman appearing as the world without ceasing to be Brahman. The Tao that gives birth. Separation, reunion as the fundamental operation. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. The tablet describes a process of analysis, taking the unified reality apart into its components, followed by synthesis, reuniting them at a higher level. This is the template for all alchemical work. Solve a coagula, dissolve and recombine, break down the existing forms so that something purer can crystallize. Applied to consciousness, you must first distinguish awareness from its contents, thoughts, sensations, identities. This is the separation. Then you reintegrate them, not by returning to naive identification, but recognizing that the contents were always made of awareness itself. You don't transcend the world, you see through it and then re-enter it transformed. You don't transcend the world, you see through it and then re-enter it transformed. Interesting. You see through it and then re-enter it transformed. The Ashtavakra Gita jumps straight to recognition. The Emerald Tablet says there's a process, and the process has stages. Transformation is real, not metaphorical. The tablet insists that its operation works on all three levels simultaneously: the spiritual, the mental, and the physical. Later, alchemists debated endlessly whether the transmutation of lead into gold was literal or symbolic. The tablet doesn't make that distinction. It implies that at the deepest level, matter and spirit aren't different substances. If you can transform consciousness, you can transform matter, because they are the same one thing at different densities. Its power is complete if it be turned into earth. If you can transform consciousness, you can transform matter, because they are the same one thing at different densities. Its power is complete if it be turned into earth. This is either the most profound or the most delusional claim in the Western tradition, depending on your metaphysics, but it's worth noting that the Tibetan Buddhist tradition makes remarkably similar claims about the rainbow body. It realized practitioners can dissolve physical matter through the completion of inner transformation. It ascends from earth to heaven and descends again to earth and receives the power of the upper and lower things. This describes the circulation. Consciousness doesn't just escape upward into transcendence and goes up, gathers the power of the upper things, universal perspective, cosmic awareness, and comes back down into embodied existence, bringing that power with it. Enlightenment that stays in heaven is incomplete. Enlightenment that stays in heaven is incomplete. It must return to earth, to the body, to the world. This is strikingly different from much of the Indian tradition, which tends to valorize the ascent, moksha, kaivalya, liberation from the cycle. The Hermetic tradition sees the cycle itself as the point. You go up and come back. The Bodhisattva ideal in Mahayana Buddhism is the closest Eastern parallel. The being who could leave but returns out of compassion. The Emerald Tablet frames this return not as compassion but as completion. The operation isn't finished until heaven and earth are united in the practitioner. Hermes Trismegistus, thrice greatest. Ooh, Trismegistus. Trismegistus. The attributed author is himself a symbol. Hermes is a fusion of the Greek Hermes, messenger between worlds, god of boundaries and thresholds, and the Egyptian Thoth, god of writing, measurement, sacred knowledge. He's thrice greatest because he has mastered three domains: the spiritual, the intellectual, and the physical. This maps directly onto the tablet's claim that its operation works on all three levels. The author is the embodiment of his own teaching. The tablet is technology, not philosophy. This is crucial. The Emerald Tablet isn't explaining reality the way a philosopher does. It's giving instructions the way an engineer does. Separate the earth from the fire is an imperative. It ascends and descends is a description of an operation you are meant to perform, and not merely understand. The entire text reads like a recipe, compressed, procedural, assumed to be useless unless you actually do it. Understanding the Emerald Tablet intellectually is like understanding a recipe intellectually. You haven't cooked anything. The obscurity is deliberate. The tablet's language is opaque, not because the author couldn't write clearly, but because the knowledge it contains was considered dangerous and sacred. The Hermetic tradition operated on the principle that truth should be available to those ready for it and invisible to those who aren't. The obscurity is a filter. If you can decode the language, you're probably ready for the practice. If you can't, the text protects you from techniques you are not prepared for. You're probably ready for the practice. If you can, the text protects you from the techniques you are not prepared for. This is the opposite of the Confucian approach. Confucius wanted clarity, accessibility, universal education. The Hermetic tradition says some knowledge should be encrypted. Both positions have wisdom and both have pathologies. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon. Beyond cosmogony, this establishes the principle of polarity as generative. The one doesn't create directly, it splits into two, and from their interaction everything is born: solar and lunar, active and receptive, analysis and synthesis, consciousness and matter. The Emerald Tablet shares with Taoism the conviction that reality is fundamentally bipolar, not in the sense of opposition, good versus evil, but in the sense of complementarity. The two need each other, neither is superior. Creation happens in the space between them. Thus the world was created. The tablet ends by claiming that it's a description of the alchemical operation, is simultaneously a description of how the cosmos itself came into being. The practitioner who performs the operation is then imitating creation. They are participating in it. Every genuine transformation is a repetition of the original creative act. This gives human consciousness a cosmic significance that most modern frameworks deny. You are not an observer of a universe that happened without you. You are the universe's mechanism for knowing and transforming itself. Fascinating crossroads in the traditions you have been mapping. Reality is one. Taoist understanding of polarity. Buddhist inside the practitioner's mind is the laboratory. Adds something none of them quite say. Human being is specifically designed to be the bridge between heaven and earth, and that this bridging function is not a spiritual aspiration but a cosmic job description. This bridging function is not a spiritual aspiration but a cosmic job description. Wow. I'm thinking of one friend right now. That tension between the path of recognition and the path of transformation might be the deepest fault line in all of these texts, and honestly it might not be resolvable. It might be the polarity the tablet itself is talking about. Ashtavakra's realization is incomplete, beautiful at the level of spirit but ungrounded, heaven without earth, ascent without return. You're already complete, there's nothing to do. The Emerald Tablet says you're already complete and there's work to do, not work to become what you're not, but work to actualize what you are across every level of reality. Wow. Alright, that's the stream. Yes.